bit. I keep going back and forth from Dorian to keep hitting that. Playing a lot of mistakes when you just go for stuff, right? So it's a good, I think it's a good place to, I mean, depending on the context, obviously it's a good place to try to play all the time, you know what I mean? Where you're constantly trying to do something that you haven't done and your likelihood of messing it up is fairly high. Obviously on a gig, maybe that's not the best place. Depends on the gig, I guess. Oh, before we get started, some good feedback. Some good on the so last video I pitched the idea of a class of like 10. I think it might be 11 or 12 people, as it turns out. If you're interested, a class, it's 180 a month. Two Tuesdays probably per month, 7 p.m. Central Time. I'm thinking. Some of the details could be tweaked here, but it's probably going to be Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Central Time. 10 to 12 people, where it's a big group lesson. We go over some interesting stuff for sure, and it's as much a gymnasium as it is a dissemination event. Like where I'm just giving out information. That's not really the spirit of the thing. It's more like I give out maybe some information and then we work on it together and you get it, right? And then you have 2 weeks until the next lesson and the point is right now is when you're mastering these things. And you have 9 to 11 other people to help keep you accountable, for that. So time to get the things that you've been putting off and maybe to get some new things that if I just tell you about them, they might just find their way to some notebook or some to-do list. I don't know if you're anything like me. My to-do lists, my musical to-do lists, just never really got done for the most part. Some of them did. Anyway, we'll talk about, how to think chords, how they go together, the way that I play chords, we'll nail all that stuff. Little nuances in your playing, how to, a lot of especially the earlier videos in this series, a lot of that stuff and some other quirky stuff. So not typical topics, I would say, but extremely relevant to how you sound, how people perceive how you sound. So, 180 a month. If you're interested, email me. I think, did my friend Roger tell me to stop giving out my email? It's all I got right now. You send me a message on Instagram, FFF, Fantastic Boom with 3 Fs, or mcuth@hotmail.com. That's right, Hotmail. I got that email address in 1998, and there you go. So, and I'm checking my junk mail every week. So far, we have 4 people in the who are signed up. One of whom you may be very surprised about the caliber of his gig. One of your classmates might really surprise you. So, um, anyway, yes, there you go. Let's talk about style versus omnipotence. Style versus omnipotence. That's a strange dichotomy to make, right? It seems like those two things are just utterly different categories, right? And they, in a sense, they are, right? But I'll explain in what sense I mean them as a dichotomy. Think of a shape. What is a shape? There's an old definition of a shape. So like the shape of a petal, or the shape of, the shape of anything. Flashlight, my little cool flashlight. It's pretty sweet. It's like a tactical something or other. It apparently doesn't work that well. And then you can go strobe. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Yep. The shape of something. There's an old definition of shape, and it's the limit of a solid. The limit of a solid. It's a very almost ornate definition. I mean, it just seems so poetic almost, but it's true, right? The shape is where a solid doesn't go, right? So something that's omnipresent, something that just exists everywhere. Divine omnipresence, by the way, if you're into, if you're into philosophical theology like I am, omnipresence should not be understood as existing in all places. So anyway, I'm resisting the temptation to go way down that rabbit hole. Shape is the limit of a solid. Pulling myself back through sheer force of will. Back to the topic. Shape is the limit of a solid. It's all the places a solid doesn't go. Something that's omnipresent, something that exists in all places, doesn't have a shape unless the universe has a shape, which apparently it does, by the way. So very interesting. But suppose, as Newton thought, the universe were infinitely large. He did think that. He also thought the like was typical of the time and before it, that the universe was infinitely old. A notion in the Middle Ages that was held up to great ridicule, successfully, I think. Ghazali, however you say his name, apparently had some really great arguments. I mean, I know some of them, but so something that exists everywhere doesn't have a shape, right? It's indiscernible what it actually is. It's just this amorphous. It's literally amorphous blob, right? Well, think of that as an analogy for your style. A style, if you want to have your own style, it's important that you not do everything, that you not always immediately slip into country and slip into jazz and slip into every possible style, right? If you constantly play all styles, you are probably one of the least stylistically identifiable players there are. Think of the least stylistically identifiable players. Aren't a lot of them, at least, studio players? Some of them aren't. Some studio players definitely have a style, right? But aren't a lot of them these omnipotent super beings who will just go right into country and blues and everything? If you play everything, you're essentially unrecognizable, right? What a style is, someone who has a style is someone who has camped out on fewer things, right? And constantly does a few things a lot, right? The people with the most identifiable style. So think, I don't know if any of you were alive in the 80s. I was kind of guitar conscious in the 90s, but I was looking back to some of the 80s stuff. Well, specifically Joe Satriani. In high school, I was way into Joe Satriani in the 90s. And meanwhile, the 90s were happening, right? The Nirvana, Pearl Jam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 90s were happening. And I liked it. I didn't love it. I hated their attitude toward guitar playing. I liked these to the extent that the 80s, which clearly a lot of the 80s playing was a little stupid, right? A lot of the 90s playing was stupid, right? But it it was an overreaction to the 80s, right? I don't know. I mean, if any of you are alive and guitar conscious back then, you would, and maybe we're reading the magazine interviews with, Blind Melon, and other such players, as they're just ruthlessly ripping on anybody who had any chops. It was such a closed-minded era, and they didn't win. Look at Instagram. Somebody taps on Instagram, all the comments, people go nuts. It's awesome. The 90s critics did not win. What's interesting? There's an old Charlie Parker interview in I forget which jazz magazine, and it was just, or they were just playing him music, and he was commenting on it, and the introduction was very interesting, because I didn't realize that during the bebop era is like, really is kind of jazz's shred era. They stole a lot of songs, sort of. I mean, they stole a lot of chord progressions. They just took pop songs written by like these dudes, like a lot of Jewish songwriters and stuff, and the bebop. A lot of the bebop dudes would just take them and then improvise a melody over them, or put something that sounded a lot like bebop soloing over them, and that became a bebop song. But it was clearly some song that was popular. This isn't the case with all of them, but Contrafact, I think, is the name for it. But anyway, so the bebop guys would solo over that stuff, right? But they would just burn, and I say burn. And really, I mean, Charlie Parker has a lot of nuances in his playing, like a lot. I mean, he's got a very, very deep bag, right? Brilliant player. So to say bebop was jazz's shred era is a bit reductive. It's way cooler in a lot of ways than rock's shred era. But I didn't realize at the time that there was basically an 80s, 90s debate happening in jazz. 80s, 90s rock guitar debate that was happening in jazz, where the new players, specifically in this case, the bebop players, the dudes who would come out and burn, right? A ton of the bebop players, or at least the bebop fans, were very dismissive of the older jazz, right? And Charlie Parker was not one of them. Charlie Parker loved all the old stuff. Charlie Parker, apparently, especially from this article where he's telling what he thinks about all these different recordings, Charlie Parker was extremely open-minded about what counts as awesome music, and of course, because he was awesome. He was freaking awesome. I'm traveling back up my outline here, as this is very typical for me, just to chase every little rabbit I see. Ooh. So Bird listens to just anything, but he comes out of it with a particular few things that he does, right? Bird has a very particular sound, right? He doesn't do everything. He doesn't sound like old jazz. He doesn't sound like he's doing classical music. He doesn't also do whatever other styles. He wasn't also doing country. He wasn't all right. He camps out on a few things, and he does them to death, right? So think about the players with the most peculiar styles, or maybe just the most identifiable styles, right? There's probably a few things that they're doing to death, right? So sometimes people will send me, like a nice note that says, I really like your style, blah, blah, blah. You have a very identifiable style. To me, it's not. But it's because, and I'm saying this by way of, this is how you know when you get it, because it'll feel like you don't have it. All right? So, but at least judging from my situation, people often will say, oh, you have a unique style. I hope this isn't coming across wrong. I don't mean it as wrong. I mean it as, here's what it feels like to me when they say that. It's like, really? Because I hear my playing all the time. So it feels like, I'm sliding to a note I'm already playing constantly. I'm doing it to death, right? And it feels like the little quirks that are in my playing, it feels like I just do them too much, right? And half of them I don't even recognize anymore. It's, you know, they're so habitual. But if you think of it statistically, right? To me, it seems like I do a few things way too much. I do them to death, right? Um, if you, but when I step back and think of it statistically, it's like, okay, let's suppose I'm doing a few things to death. When a listener, from the listener standpoint, they're listening through a bunch of different guitar players. And if one of them is doing some things that the other players aren't doing, or is doing a cluster of things, that cluster doesn't necessarily exist in these other places, right? That exact combination of weird things that player's doing, or things that player's doing, does not exist in those other players. That person sounds unique to them, right? Even if to that player they sound like they're just playing the same thing over and over and over, and they're doing it to death. What it feels like to have a unique style, I think, is to feel like you're doing a few things too much, right? To other people, because they don't hear those few things in every guitar player, it doesn't feel like too much. It doesn't even feel like that much, right? So if they get to you and you're you know, bending to everything, you're just constantly bending everywhere you go, it's just bends and bends and bends. Well, who plays like that, right? Let's say that you, I mean, to you, you're going to think, man, I bend too much. I just have this one trick, right? To you, you're going to get sick of it. To other people who are listening to the landscape of all the guitar players that there are out there, other people aren't bending constantly, right? And they're not listening to you constantly like you are listening to you constantly, right? So what it means to have a style is not to do everything, not to, so I mentioned omnipotence, right? Not to be able to do everything, or at the very least, not to do everything. Let's say that you have the capacity to do everything, so that you don't veer into the amorphous, astylistic, right? Most generic guitar player in the world. You might not want to actively do everything very much. You know what I mean? Can't pick some things, and or let's put it another way. Your style is as much the things that you decide you're not going to do. And I have a story about this. So, your style is as much the thing, and this goes for writing and production also. That's a big part. So if you have a writing or production style, if your albums have a style, it's as much because you've decided to not do things. Oh yeah, I remember where the bird thing was coming from. Well, up the thing. If you heard some of the 80s guitar players, so in the 90s, I was sometimes culling through, you know, I would get a CD of so-and-so shred guy that I heard was really cool. And to be honest, most of them I didn't really care for. A few of them I did. But most of them I didn't really care for. And so, you know, their albums, you get their album and like big rock song right off the top, another big rock song, acoustic ballad, country song, nylon string song, this song, and those albums, so many of them were so obviously intentionally so profoundly diverse that the album didn't really have a style. But more importantly, you question whether this guitar player really had a style, you know? The guitar player sounded so generic because they did a country song, they did an acoustic song, a nylon string song, like 4 rock songs, blah, blah, blah. You know, they every one of those albums should have just been called, here's all the stuff I can do. That just should be the names of those albums, because that's essentially what they were. They were resumes. Here are the things I can do, and look how good I am at everything, right? Meanwhile, you go over to an Alan Holdsworth album, and it's like, whoa, dude, this guy sounds like nobody else. Is he doing this? Did Alan Holdsworth do the Alan Holdsworth sound to death? Probably. You know what I mean? Does Eric Johnson do the Eric Johnson sound to death? Sure. Right? Does he always sound like Eric Johnson? Does he always sound idiosyncratic? Yeah, for sure. Is Eric Johnson maybe on some days sick of Eric Johnson's playing? Maybe. He probably turns on some Alan Holdsworth to say, whoa, man, this guy's amazing, right? Alan Holdsworth, by the way. If you haven't checked out Alan Holdsworth, he's the greatest. He's the greatest musician who ever picked up the guitar, if there is such a thing. If there is such a thing. I really, in my more honest moments, I would reject that there is such a thing, but he doesn't make sense. He is a historical anomaly. Anyway, brilliant, off the charts, brilliant. So, did Alan Holdsworth do the Alan Holdsworth thing to death, where he barely picks any notes? He has this one tone, right? He has these lines that are only lines that Alan Holdsworth would play. Did he do it to death? In the sense that I mean it, sure he did. Sure he did. He did it constantly, and he never went into a country song, right? He never went into a country song. Did Pat Metheny ever go into it? Pat Metheny probably did at some point, but you know what I mean. Right? So your style is as much the things that you don't do. And this absolutely applies to album making, right? When you're making an album, I think what's important is deciding the things you're not going to do. Unless your style, I mean, there are some artists whose style is, you have no idea what to expect. This next song could be anything. It's just going to be crazy, right? I like that. That's cool. My friend MZ and I were listening to TV on the radio the other day, and TV on the radio strikes me like that, right? Like, just the style is, get ready to be surprised, because it's going to be nuts. Whatever it is, it's going to be nuts, right? Although that may be a very genre-bending thing, right? But notice still, in a sense, there is a pigeonholing of what this is, even if it's not genre pigeonholing. But so I have a story about this that was the final nail in the coffin for me about trying to be omnipotent. By the way, there's a great freedom in this, right? You want to be good at a lot of stuff, but there's a great freedom in just embracing your strengths and not working every single day for the rest of your life on the things that seem to defy you, right? Once you have a style, maybe you don't need those things as much. In fact, it's possible that if attaining those extra skills and those extra stylistic capabilities means that you'll play those things all the time, then maybe they're not a good thing at all. I'm fortunate enough to play a decent amount of 2 guitar player gigs, right? Which is really cool and I think kind of rare. I get to play a lot with this guy, Noel Johnston. He's also my best friend. By the way, if you haven't checked out Noel yet, you need to, especially if you at all wonder what's on the periphery of theory. Who's thinking of crazy crap in theory that I might be able to go harvest something and take it back and write a song around it or make a style around it or whatever. Noel is a factory for new ideas for you. And new, very, very cool ways of thinking about music. So I play a lot of gigs with Noel. It's actually been a little while, but played plenty of gigs with Mark Lettieri, and like Lettieri was like, like the first time I played with him, it's like, holy crap, I need to go home and start working with a metronome a lot more. I don't think he worked with a metronome as much, but he played with albums a lot. But it was more like, holy crap, the bar for how good my time is supposed to be just went up to here. And I'm still not there, but who has as good a time as he does? I think nobody. Wayne Krantz doesn't, like Wayne Krantz's time. He would have been, anyway, yeah, his time is amazing. I guess. It always struck me as that. There's probably some recordings that, who knows, but one in particular, my friend Anthony Plant, brilliant player. We've done some gigs where I'm on acoustic, he's on nylon, and he, on at least 2 of them, actually all of them, has absolutely trounced me. Absolutely just blown me off the stage, right? Anthony Plant on nylon string is astonishing. It's so good. He's brilliant. Anyway, Anthony Plant, he's worth checking out. His album wise, he has a very diverse style. I think it's still, in a sense, it's still constrained. I think it's still identifiable. Um, uh, like if he gets into rock and he gets into jazz, it's more like the rock through jazz thing. So, but Anthony Plant, one time a student came to me, uh, and and he was in his 20s, and he was like, I really want to learn. I'm way into metal. I want to learn to pick fast. And I was like, well, first of all, you kind of picked the wrong teacher, because the one thing that's most defied me in my life is fast picking. My right hand is very modest. I've never been able to pick very fast. But maybe we can figure it out, right? Because it had been probably 10 or 15 years since I had bothered to think about it, because there was this point with my picking where I had worked on it so much and was not getting the results I wanted. And I was finally like, screw this. I'm done sinking practice time into it, and I'm going to go work on the stuff I can do, right? Well, lo and behold, this kid and I are working on it, and all of a sudden I make this breakthrough by trying a less than ideal picking style, which, or to me, I thought was less than ideal. Maybe it's just equally good with the other ones, but all of a sudden I could pick fast, right? After, I don't know, a decade and a half of playing guitar, all of a sudden I could do it. But not super well. Like, I mean, things weren't calibrated between the hands as well as they should have been, but at times I could go, and it wasn't so bad. And Anthony Plant and I have a church gig together, and I was so excited that Sunday morning. I was like, dude, check this out. And I went, and it probably wasn't great. And he said something to me that sealed the deal. He goes, that's great, Mark. Now never do that again. And I kind of felt where he was going with it, but I had him spell it out. He said, you have a style that's built around not doing that. It's evolved around not being able to do that, but it's especially built around the fact that you don't do that. One of the things that's recognizable about your playing is that you never do that. And he said, when you pick fast, you sound a lot more like every other guitar player. And there you go. So, omnipotence is overrated, because look at it this way: history and art. This goes for any art. History remembers the who's, not the what's, right? It does not remember the baddest artists. It doesn't remember the people who were just better than the other people, right? Picasso probably knew somebody who was just better, more technically proficient at art, at doing visual art than he was, right? But history doesn't remember that person. I'm making up that person, or maybe that person never existed, but and I know very little about visual art history. So, but history doesn't remember the baddest guitar players. It remembers the most stylistically unique guitar players, right? And that you can, and now sometimes that ends up being the same person, right? Sometimes, like Eddie really can burn, and it's really super burning, and you've never heard anything like it. But it's the latter category that is what's important in art, is that you've never heard somebody who sounds like this, right? And what that is a cluster of things that you do to death. That's what it is. And especially if one of those things is something you don't hear other people do, you should do that one absolutely to death, right? Just constantly do it until it's habitual, right? It's muscle memory. So history remembers the who's, not the what's. But it's a pretty it's a pretty statistically safe bet that nobody in my audience, especially very few people watch this crap anyway, with good reason. These videos are awful. Very few. It's very, very likely that I'm not talking to, that one of you isn't the baddest guitar player on earth and isn't going to be the baddest guitar player on earth. Chances are none of you are going to be better than Julian Lage or Guthrie Govan or Eric Gales or somebody like that. You know what I mean? I think that's a pretty stylistically safe bet. Well, so the idea of competing with them, of catching up, of just being better than them, right? It might be healthy for your guitar playing, for developing a style, to abandon that, right? Get good because you need them. You want some facility, right? And you want to know a bunch of stuff. But let's say you look at a scale, you know, let's say you already know your major scale and your pentatonic scale everywhere, right? Major scale, of course, including all the modes of the major scale, right? You already know it. Modes are not positions, by the way. There's an old video I have on that in this series that you should watch. If you think of, when I say mode, you think of this position, now this position, now this, that as I'm changing positions, I'm changing modes. It is imperative that you get rid of that notion. Go watch whatever old video that is. I think it probably has modes in the name. I don't know. But somebody shows you, here's the melodic minor scale, and here's some uses you can get out of it. And you're like, you know what? I'm pretty sure I won't use those sounds. You're under no obligation to work to death on those things, right? If you listen to guitar players and you don't like the sound of the dudes who pick a ton and do legato, or who do a bunch of, I say legato, you know, from an older video, I don't buy that that's a good use of those terms, staccato and legato. But somebody who maybe you don't like the sound of people who hammer on and pull off, and you love the sound of Al Di Meola picking every note, right? Camp out on the things that you want to sound like. You do not need to be an omnipotent super being. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. It's not important to be omnipotent. It's important to do a few things a ton, because then you become a who, and that's what's important in art, is that you are identifiable, that you have your own sound. That goes for album making. Almost everything I've said applies to album making, as it does to guitar playing. So, make sense? The class, hour and a half, 180 a month. There's like 5 to 7 slots left. 6 to 7 slots. Yeah, I've got 4 people. Yep, 6 to 7 slots left. So mcuth@hotmail.com, and I'll be perusing my junk folder in case it goes there, or send me a message on Instagram. I think YouTube took out the messages. So, doofus. The YouTube messages one time I got a message from Mike Landau on it, because I mentioned something about, somebody was mentioning the Hot Rod Deluxe. Anyway, he told me about that Fender amp he had coming out well before it was out, and I told my friends, I'm saying, I don't know if this was actually Mike Landau telling me this, but this guy said he's got a Fender amp coming out, and then sure enough, a Fender amp. I was, that's. And then because I'm shameless, I made him listen to a clip I had at the time. So an old thing called If and Only If is really what it's called, IFF. It's on YouTube. It's aside from Fantastic Boom, it's the only thing I stand by. Like if I were to say, here is my musical legacy, I would say the whole Fantastic Boom catalog, absolutely, I stand by every single bit of it. And that one track, IFF. So it's an instrumental thing, and yeah, I'm very proud of that. So there you go. Yes. Bye.